So I'm going to show you how to make quark. Quark is considered a lactic set cheese, meaning that it really relies on acid production rather than rennet. So there is a little bit of rennet in it, but it sits overnight, and it's very simple to make and very reliable. So I have 2 pots going. I decided to break it into 2 just to make it easier to work with. I have a recipe. And I outline all the cultures and everything, but basically these are my cultures. I'm going to use MM100 and LM57. You're going to see those a lot, so you know, after a while you start to see a pattern. So I have both of them in here, and I'm going to sprinkle it onto the milk. I should have done a better job, but normally I would try to sprinkle that on the surface. I'll see if I can do a little bit better here. They tend to get very humid, so don't use them, don't keep your cultures out for very long in the cheese room because it's very humid out here. So I'll let that sit, and then after 1 minute I'm going to stir it. And then I have calcium chloride, which when you're pasteurizing milk, you're going to lose some calcium. So adding calcium back to the milk will make a stronger curd, increase your yield. It's just calcium chloride. Some people ask, oh, do you put calcium in your cheese? And then they don't want to buy the cheese, but it doesn't really make sense. It's a very simple compound. It's not really a chemical. It's just elements. They're elements that get sort of maybe unavailable when you pasteurize the milk. If it was raw milk, cheese, or a hard cheese, it's up to you whether or not you add it. The rennet, we use animal rennet. They do make other rennets like vegetable and thistle, mushroom, but we use traditional animal rennet. And what we do, this is considered a single strength, and that is something you should dilute with a little bit of water. So single strength we dilute by 40. If it was double strength, we would dilute it by 80. And same with calcium chloride. I usually like to dilute it a little bit. It's not a pure science. Diluting it by 10 is what most people do. So I'm going to use my little purette here, and I'll measure out the amount, and then usually I pour it in the big one so I can add some more water. You should always use tepid water. Don't use cold or hot, just use tepid. And on here, so this is the quark. When I look at the recipe, I'm doing 5 gallons, and I'm going to go ahead and I just add everything. I'm going to put the culture, I'm going to put the calcium chloride, and I'm going to put the rennet, and I'll add the rennet last. So that's the last thing I add, and then you just gently mix it in. I'm going to mix in those cultures that I just added so that those can start working. I'm going to use my little measuring thing. This is the thing to measure milk in the bulk tank. And the temperature for this milk, you know, around 80 degrees is good. It should sit at room temperature, and room temperature is usually about 72 for cheese. So I will make sure the temperature tonight, you know, is at about 72. If there's any clumps in there, I may come back and break those up, because those really shouldn't have been like that. So I'll come back to that one. This one looks better. I did a better job sprinkling this one. All right. So I'm going to add my calcium chloride, and so when it's like that, I just go in there and break those up, just so your cultures are responsible for acid production. So you definitely want to get that mixed in there. You need that acid production overnight. So I've added my calcium chloride, and then the last thing I added was that dilute rennet. And I'm just gently, I always like to mix bottom to top, because if you just mix in a circle, sometimes it just all gets going in the same direction. If you do a circle, just be sure to reverse it. But either way, you know, that's what you want to do, is just really mix up from the bottom to the top, and a little bit of circling is good too. I'm going to just set that over there. And then you're going to put a lid on and leave it overnight. And so tomorrow we'll come back and we'll cut the curd and put that into some sanitized cheesecloth, and we're gonna hang it overnight, and then the next day we'll put it in that walk-in cooler and let it drip a little bit more. Sometimes I drain it too much, and when I try to mix it with the herbs, it's just too dry. I just add water back into it, because essentially you've just drained out too much water. So you can decide. Sometimes I use the blender. I always whip it up in the blender, and that gives it a really nice texture. Some people just do it by hand. You can do it by hand as well, but I sort of like the blender because it gives it a nicer texture. So here's the cheesecloth that I'm using, and I'm gonna sterilize it, but I just wanted to say a word of caution. Make sure your cheesecloth is in good shape. There are different grades. You can see maybe between these, this is a darker one and this is lighter. I really like this dark one. So if I'm hanging a lot of curds, I want something pretty strong. I'm gonna take my chances today and use this weak one, but what I'll do is I'll just also put a bowl underneath it. I'll make sure that it's, that I have other options. So I'll put maybe like one of those 5-gallon pots underneath just in case it breaks, because that has happened. But one of these should be able to hold 4 to 5 gallons of milk. And these pots hold about 4 to 5 gallons. I think I have 4 gallons in each one from yesterday. So we're gonna put one pot into the cheesecloth. And I'll show you a nice way to drain most of the whey before you put it in the cheesecloth. So it takes off a lot of that weight initially. So for draining for the Quark, I'm going to use these pans. They have holes in them. I used a drill just to create the holes because it seemed to be something that would help me drain things a little faster, and the edges were nice because they retain the curd so it doesn't fall off. I'm going to go ahead and grab my cheesecloth that I have here. I've got it to almost a boil, and I'm going to cool that off and spread it inside those pans. So I tend to make cheese, just like twice a week because I don't want it to take up my whole week. But I do try to make a lot of cheese in those 2 days. A lot of the time you do have downtime. So when you're heating up milk, you might have 45 minutes. When you're cooling it down, you might have 20 minutes. Certainly if you have other things to do, like start making dinner, work on lunch, whatever, there's time for that. I try to pack a bunch in to one day. So we're doing our soft cheeses, those got salted. I have my Quark, and I'm making a hard cheese. So between all of this, I'll have about 80, 90 pounds of cheese. And I like to just complete that in 1 to 2 days instead of dragging it out all week. It takes just as much time to make 1 pound of cheese as it does 100 pounds of cheese. So you're better off to do quantity rather than small quantities because it's just as much work. But always, it's going to be gauged by how much you can sell. So if you have a good market, then you can make plenty of cheese. I'm checking my Quark. I'm rinsing my meter, this little meter. I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to check the pH. And goat cheese, these lactic set cheeses, they drain well at 4.6. It's not critical. Old cheesemakers had no pH meters and they did just fine. But you can see it's 4.4. It might go up on me. I'll bring it over here. 4.4. So my meter reads 2 points low. And so my meter reads 2 points low. I check it with just a standard solution that I know is 7 for pH, and I put it in, and it tells me 6.8, so I know I've got 2 points. So for me, this is 4.6, perfect. I'm gonna go ahead and rinse this and put it back. Always turn it off, otherwise the battery will die on you. Back in. I have my sanitized container. I have my cheesecloth that's in that perforated pan, and just a reminder, look at the whey, how it's separated. And that tells you that it's ready. So that's, we're gonna just start scooping this and pouring it into the pan. I'm gonna pull this forward a little bit so that it's hanging over the edge. It will drain a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and gently put these curds in here. Just be aware that your pan isn't like off the table too far. You don't want it to fall. So the cork is draining. You can see it. I like to put it over the drain. The more I can contain the whey, the easier it is to clean up. If you leave any cheese left over on the floor, little curds or whey, the next day you'll have some cleaning to do. The curds are the most difficult. The whey isn't too bad, but it's nice to confine it the best that you can. So I'm going to show you how I like to hang the cork, or if you were doing goat cheese, same thing. I'm going to use this metal hook. These are very sharp, so you have to be careful you don't put a hole in your cheesecloth. So sanitize. I take the four corners. Make sure your table's always clean, even down to the legs, because if, just like surgery, if it was to touch it, would be contaminated. You don't want to get things in your product. So I'm taking the corners. I'm going to just gently tie the corners. I don't want to overdo it, because if I do, it's going to spill out the sides. So I'm taking all the corners, and I've got a very loose tie. Now when I pull it up, I'm going to get all this whey coming out. I'm going to gently put the hook through. Don't hook yourself and don't get the cheesecloth. And you know, I have confidence in this cheesecloth, so I'm not going to put any kind of bucket underneath, and I'm just going to hang it over here. So I have it here. You know, I need to be obviously aware, sorry about that, oops. You need to be aware of your surface. You know, it should be clean. Everything it's touching should be clean. A lot of times I just use the edge of the pasteurizer, but at the moment the lid is on, so I'm not using that. And I try to put it out of the way. I don't want to be bumping into it or spilling things on it. A really nice place to put it is on the back of this table. If I didn't have so much going on here, I could stack up maybe 4 or 5 along the back of the table, but you got to be careful the table doesn't flip over if you get too much weight on it. That's going to drain for about most of the day. I'd say probably by the time we have dinner, that's going to go into the walk-in cooler. So I have both of the corks draining, and I'm not totally confident about one of my cheesecloths, so I have a bucket under it. So it's going to drain into a bucket. If for some reason this split open, I could salvage the curds. It wouldn't be so bad. It would not be ideal. I really try to prevent it, but I've got a little cheap insurance. You can see both of these. These are called the bee's knees. I love that. So the term bee's knees, I believe, started with cheese making. These bags that are hanging, they're absolutely beautiful. And if you have them hanging up on the back of that table, and you've got 4 of them lined up, it's just a beautiful picture. I do think a nice idea someday might even be to consider having a bar put up here, and maybe either having it drain to the floor or drain into your sink. You know, but something to think about later if you really got into doing a lot more cheese making. These soft cheeses are a lot of fun. They're easy, just like the hard cheeses. The hard cheeses are very simple and a lot of fun. The soft ones, being like these guys, they can be a little more time consuming and they have a short shelf life, but I'm determined to keep doing it, and you may find that you really enjoy it as well. So here's the cork. I probably have waited 2 days longer than I should have, just because we've had a lot going on. But you can see it's, you know, it can get a little bit dry, a little bit stiff. Not a problem. This has been hanging in that walk-in cooler. What I'm going to do is just divide it up. I'll put it into the blender mixer. You know, I'll probably do it in like sections of 3, and I will add a little bit water back to it. It'll be just fine. So I have my garlic in here. I have about 3 cloves, and that's for about that much pork. So I've already whipped it up. I had to add maybe about a 1/4 cup of water to it just to get it to the consistency I like. But you can do, certainly, you could do this by hand. I just prefer to use a mixer. And so I put a little bit of Quark in here with my garlic just to help it blend up a little bit better. And I did 3 cloves of garlic, and I will add a tablespoon of dill and about 3/4 of a tablespoon of salt. Just do it to taste. And these are the containers I use. I'll leave some for you, and I'll tell you where to get them. These are plant-based. It's PLA, which is a plant-based plastic. I don't really know how to do it. And then I use a little scale, just one of these scales, and I put in 7 ounces of Quark in here, and that comes to a markup of about 5 times. So we'll sell it for $5, 7 ounces.